Welcome to the On the Air podcast, a companion to On the Air magazine, a bi-monthly magazine from ARRL for beginner to intermediate ham radio licensees. I'm your host and the editor of On the Air, Becky Schoenfeld, W1BXY. Every month, the On the Air podcast extends material found in On the Air magazine to help you learn more about everything that the ham radio hobby and service has to offer. The On the Air podcast is sponsored by ICOM for the love of ham radio. Welcome to the November 2025 episode. The November-December 2025 issue of On the Air featured an article entitled Confidence in Preparedness Starts with Knowing Your Equipment by Jessica Crotty. And today we're joined by Jessica Crotty herself. Jessica is the CEO of Sea Crane, a Northern California company known for designing and supporting quality radios and communication products. Jessica is here to talk a bit more about the need to not only have a license and a radio, but to know the ins and outs of using that radio long before the day you need to actually use it. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. So, Jessica, a lot of us, myself included, think we're taking steps toward being prepared, better prepared for a weather event or an extended power outage or some other emergency, when really we aren't. You know, I can tell you right now on my kitchen table at home, I have a weather radio that I bought a few months ago, and I haven't even taken it out of the box. Just having the radio makes me feel a little better, but I know enough to know there's a difference between having the radio and actually knowing how to use it, and I've got to put in the time to really learn how to use it. So as someone who manufactures and sells radios, do you see that awareness of that difference among your customers, or do you find that they need that message? Hey, learn to use your radio.
I cannot tell you the number of calls that we have taken over the 40 years that we've been in business that people have been like, oh, we just had a power outage and I went to use my radio and it didn't work. And it wasn't that it didn't work. It was that they put it in the closet 6 years ago and never did anything with the batteries, or it was on the wrong switch setting for the radio to be powered the way they were trying to use it. And they had never taken the time to actually learn the different properties of the radio so that when the time came, they would be prepared. I mean, you think about like a generator or any other piece of equipment that you're not going to use all the time. You're not going to wait until that day of the event, hopefully, to try to go, oh, do I have gas? Do I have the oil set up? Do I have it? It's the same with a radio. If you wait until that day, it's going to be really stressful. And we've seen that too, where it's like, oh, I don't have the right cable, or I didn't know how to find the right station. And the people that do and are like light years ahead. And the confidence that goes with that and the peace that goes with that is significant. It's just like one less thing to have to worry about. But by and far, yes, the message needs to be preached over and over from the mountaintops, because people don't inherently do that work. They're just like, oh, it'll be fine. I might not ever need it.
I have a radio now and it goes in a drawer. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So how do you recommend somebody begins to familiarize themselves with a new radio, such as a 2-meter handhold that a ham might typically buy after they get their license?
Yes, so from what I've seen, I am not a licensed ham, just for the record. That's something I'm on my list to get licensed. But from what I've seen and from the people here that are, it's definitely use it, right? So get the instructions, get in with a group. Ideally, that's where I've seen the most success for people, is where they have people that are doing the thing, and they can actually be with them and ask their questions in person. I have, though, seen people where maybe you're really rural or really remote or antisocial. All of those things can be true, right? And YouTube has tons of information out there. So how-tos, getting it started. We even have several people that have done videos for our company for regular radios that also do ham radios and evaluate other equipment. And they give it very, very deep dives into how this works, how to install the batteries, how to key up the to a particular call sign, how to
Mhm.
transmit, how to receive, all of the different pieces and parts. And then I think subscribing, obviously, these are people that have subscribed. Maybe somebody shared this with them though, but subscribing to publications or email
Mhm.
newsletters where information is shared about these kinds of topics. I feel like anytime you want to learn something new, whether it's baking or it's radio, whether it's fixing your car, it doesn't matter. If you put yourself in the environment where people are having those conversations, that's where you're going to get the information. And there might be that one article that really helps.
Mhm.
So I think that those are all key pieces. And then committing, like the commitment of I'm going to spend 15 minutes every week or an hour a week or whatever the commitment is that you can make. That's the key because if I do just 15 minutes, I'm not going to have the confidence. But if I do 15 minutes
Yeah.
over 6 weeks or 6 months,
Mhm.
by the time that time comes, I'm super confident. It's muscle memory. I don't have to think about it. I'm not having to pull out the instruction manual when the power's out, trying to figure out what I'm doing. Hopefully, I've created something where I can cheat sheet or something where I know what I'm gonna do when this time comes, and then it's easy.
Yeah, and that commitment that you mentioned of, 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, I would imagine that that's also a good way to keep from getting overwhelmed. Some of these radios, have a lot of like menus and a lot of different features, and some of them, the manuals are better for some of them than others. And I think setting a limit for yourself, like that 15 minutes, might be good. Even if you want to go beyond the 15 minutes, just sort of keep it
Cut
there
yourself
so you
off.
don't, yeah, so you don't get overwhelmed. Yeah,
I think that's a really good point. I think that's a really good point. Yeah, it's easy to go too deep.
yeah. I wanted to touch upon in your On the Air article, you mention that when you're working with your radio and getting used to it, that you test it in different environments, indoors, outdoors, in your vehicle. Can you speak to why that's important?
Yeah, so what we've experienced just with the regular radios is that they operate differently in different environments. And so that's true for every radio because radio frequencies, the way they transmit and what they run into as obstacles are different in each environment. So if you're in a very wooded area and you're farther away from a signal versus if you're closer or you have a metal building that you're in versus if you're in a vehicle where you've got no reception, but you step outside the vehicle, uh, everything's great. The same with a house. Sometimes the construction of a home, you go out on the porch, works perfect. Go inside, or you're in the basement, for example. That may indicate too, especially with the ham, from what I've seen, most of the ham radio operators I know have fairly sophisticated antenna setups, at least the ones that operate on a really regular basis. And so, if you know, like in an emergency, I'm probably going to be here, that might indicate whether you need an antenna setup in order for it to work the way you need it to work in that environment. I think too, with a lot of those handhelds, I've seen that there's attachments that you can add on for like extended antennas for like little flexible whip antennas and different things that they
Mm-hmm.
had. When I was researching it, I was like, oh yeah, depending on your environment again, and you're not going to know. So like again, having all the things is kind of a wasted time and energy. If it's not necessary, you might be in a place where it's like you're in the middle. So we have people that we know that are in the middle of the desert. They have one big antenna system and they're set. They don't need anything
Oh.
else because there's nothing in the way, like for miles and
Yeah.
miles. But if you're in where we are with redwood trees everywhere and mountains and then the oceans on the other side, like, you know, you could be on the other side of the street, works great. Your side of the
Mm-hmm.
street, not so much. So I think that that environmental testing really makes a big difference for knowing that, yes, I have confidence that I know how it's going to work in this situation because I've tested it.
Yeah, that's great. When talking about preparedness, a lot of hams have this saying, two is one and one is none. If you have one radio and that dies, well, then you have none. Can you talk a bit about the importance of having backup gear? Maybe, certainly batteries, but what other kinds of things might be good to have in backup?
Yeah, so I mean, from what I've seen, the generator setup really kind of does make like, okay, so I have a battery, but battery only lasts so long. Even if I have
Mm,
multiple batteries, if I don't have a way to charge them, I'm kind of limitation, right? So a generator, we always look at it too as redundancy of any
mm,
kind. Even when we're designing product, we try to look at that. It's like, is there a way to make things fail safe? When we're building servers for our company, I'm always like, okay, well, a redundant power supply, because if the power goes, like, I still have another supply. I feel like that's true with anything that you design. So if you have radios, like ideally you have a second one, and maybe you get a used one in that situation
mm,
because, like, we offer even discounted products that we call orphans, that we sell at a discount. A lot of places do that, like where they have open box or something like that, where it's been tested, it has a warranty of some kind. So that way you're not like, okay, well, I just spent however much I spent on the
yeah.
thing. Maybe you don't get the same level, but you at least have something that you can count on in the event that the one doesn't work or it gets ruined. Because we
Hmm.
saw that too with friends that we have in North Carolina when that hurricane went through. It
Oh,
was like,
yeah.
yeah, guess what? Like, yours is in the mud. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't, like, that's great. But if you had it with your go bag, which some of them didn't, like, but if you had one in there, you would at least have an alternative because you don't know when the power is going to come back in a situation like that. And then in some
Yeah.
cases, I think there's some areas where it's still not fully functional. So I think, yeah, being prepared to me definitely looks like how prepared can I be without being, maybe insane or out of budget, but like, I think that's always it too, right? The budgetary constraints. Like, what can I
Yeah.
do within the budget that I'm operating in to maximize my investments? Um,
Yeah.
and some of this stuff is a pretty hefty investment. So it's like, really, could I not like get one more battery or get that generator, the
Mm,
little one set up? Or in some cases too, we had people that were using like car battery kind of setup, like
Oh. Hmm.
and that worked pretty well because you got quite a bit of time on something like that, and it was a relatively low dollar value with an inverter to put together some sort of a system. But I feel like there's a lot of creativity back to YouTube and back to some of these different places that offer even some of the articles when we went back and looked in some of your guys' older on the air
Mm,
podcasts, people have tips. So you gotta go look for those
yeah.
tips. Like people have gotten really creative with some of that.
Yeah, and your recommendation about used equipment as the backup equipment, that sounds like a really good way to keep, the budget managed as well. In terms of having some backup for instructions, I've heard you mention cheat sheets a couple of times in the podcast, and I know that you talk about cheat sheets in your article in the November December issue as well. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen folks deploy cheat sheets?
Yeah. So my experience with instruction manuals, as a person who's written many,
Hmm.
is that people don't read them for the most part. And so we've tried to develop cheat sheets in different ways, but we found even internally with instructions, when you have long instructions, at a certain point, especially when you think you know something, you stop using the instructions because like, I already know how to set the memory or I already had. So kind of those key functions of what are the main things that somebody's going to use or that you're going to use um, to do. And so like, it's short. It has to be really short. Otherwise it's just another set of instructions, right? But like those handful, and that makes sense to you. Like, push this button, do this thing, and then hit this thing for 3 seconds, done,
Hmm.
right? Or maybe you just need to know which two buttons and you're going to know the rest. So
Hmm.
whatever it is for you that keeps it quick. In some cases, like on the back of battery compartments, I've seen people do that.
Mm.
Sometimes people have a little laminated sheet that they could pull out.
Mhm.
I know in our case for some of our processes, like even month end or something like that, people have just like a one pager for like
Oh
the
yeah.
main things that they get hung up on. I think that's important too, is like maybe you do have 90% of it, you've got it, but there's that thing you always forget or always get stuck on. That's an easy one to just like add to the list because now I'm not having to remember for whatever reason my brain doesn't like that thing. And
Right.
so, now I'm helping my brain not have to take up this bandwidth of that thing I always forget.
Hmm.
So I think that those are super useful. I think too, sometimes people think they're going to have access, right? You're going to have access to the internet or you're going to be able to look it up and so what do you need if you don't have that?
Hmm.
What do you need if you don't have that? Because you might not. So having a printed
Yeah.
copy of an instruction manual somewhere where you can get it, if you're not going to do the cheat sheet is super super
Mm.
important because I can't tell you the amount of times that people have after an emergency, like they have no idea that they probably threw it away honestly with the packaging
Oh.
because they they just didn't ever, get to that spot. So then they're like, paying now for an instruction manual to get mailed to them because they no longer have it. Um,
Mm.
or we all have that drawer, right? The drawer
Oh
that's got
yes.
every instruction manual that you've ever bought for appliance,
Yeah.
even ones you don't have anymore. Uh, and so that's not a fun time either to go through that drawer to try to find the one thing that you need. So knowing where that is or keeping it with your equipment, I think is super valuable. But the cheat sheet, I've just found that that's more realistic for most people. They can get to that, especially if it's laminated. It's like I know where it is, I can do it. These are the only five
Hmm.
things I care about. So
Yeah. And if it's laminated and it's, raining or snowing or whatever it might be doing out, then you've got a little bit of protection there too. That,
yeah,
you
that's
know,
true.
yeah.
That's true.
So a lot of us think about our radios as being kind of set it and forget it. But ideally, we should be practicing with our gear in the hope that it will actually be of use to us if, heaven forbid, we're in an emergency. How often do you recommend taking the radio out and practicing to sort of keep up your familiarity and your skills? And what kinds of things should folks be practicing?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, you know, like the minimum I would think would be like monthly, honestly. Um, Really, ideally, you'd be doing it like every week, especially if you're doing the ham radio stuff, because I feel like that slips a little more for people from what I've seen. Even our some of our operators here who had previously gotten their ham license years ago and then recently just renewed, stuff changes. The rules can change, some of the ways you get to interact can change. And so if you're not listening, and I know we talked about, when you're not regularly in there listening or trying to find out like what's normal versus what's an emergency. Then when you're
Mm-hmm.
in an emergency, you don't know. You're like, okay, well, is this important? Is that not important? I don't know what I'm hearing. I don't know if this is something I need to act on or not. So I do feel like that regular familiarity. I feel like that's even true with regular radio. If you're listening to the weather, it's kind of like, oh, okay, like this is just a normal weather broadcast. And then when you hear oh, no, that's a different kind
Yeah.
of, so
Oh
even
yeah.
if it's, again, occasionally, and then when stuff is happening, right? Being, even if it's not happening for you, having that
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to listen, maybe it's nearby, maybe it's not too far away, then you can listen in and see. I know on st- ours are only receivers, so you're only being able to hear what's being broadcast. But even that, I felt like the other day there was stuff coming through, and it was like, oh, super interesting, not important, right? Just people chatting, and
Mm-hmm.
then you hear something, you're like, oh, well, that's different. That's just, but it was a routine, and so it was like, oh, routine check. Here's the,
Yeah.
and so you start to get to be like, oh, now, when somebody's got an emergency and what that sounds like, now you're like, okay, well, I know that's different than what I've been
Mm-hmm.
hearing. And so, yeah, that regular practice, and again, the muscle memory, it's kind of like if you have a bike, in your shed, you're
Yeah.
not going to be like, oh, let me just pull out this bike once a year and like try to ride it, and my tires are flat and the chain's all rusted, like nothing's
Mhm.
working. It's kind of like the same thing. If you're not using your product and checking your batteries, I think that the recommendation is every 6 months for a battery check. We
Mhm.
say every month, honestly, because I've seen enough people's batteries corrode. I honestly had it just the other day on flashlight.
Yeah.
I had a flashlight. I swear to you, I check that every 3 months, and the flashlight was like corroded solid too. Like,
Oh.
knocking it, it's not happening. I don't
Mm.
know if I got some bad batteries, but that happens, you know. Sometimes you do get a bad set and they've been sitting, maybe, I don't know what, I don't know, my kids got a hold of it. I have no idea. But if you're not regularly checking it, I've even seen it where people's pets get a hold of things and they don't know because they haven't checked the bag for 6 months. And like next thing you know, it's like the wires chewed, or maybe you have a rat problem. Like,
Oh
you don't
God.
know, like things get chewed through, and next thing you know, you don't have what you thought you had. But if you're regularly checking in, then at least you're again confident that, like, oh, I know what my equipment is and what it's done, and I know the last time I checked it. It's that
Mhm.
really sinking feeling when the power's out, like you
Yeah.
haven't done it, like, oh, I haven't charged anything, everything's dead. Like that's a terrible feeling.
Yeah, yeah. I appreciate that you said that even practicing listening is important. You mentioned, that maybe something that sounds different is going on, but you listen and you realize it's some sort of regular check, some sort of regular traffic. I agree. I think it's really important to practice listening so that if, if heaven forbid you're in some kind of situation and, what if you've never heard traffic being passed and you happen to hear some of that and you don't really know what it is you're hearing, it can be, it can be kind of confusing. Like, should I be doing something? What is this? Who is it for? But if you're on the air working with your radio and also listening to different kinds of things that go on the air, it could, even that can potentially prepare you for some kind of out of the ordinary situation where you need to be as ready as you possibly can.
Absolutely.
And the things that you said about practicing with the radio itself, making sure that your batteries are up to date, that they haven't leaked all over the place and made a dangerous mess. It's one thing to discover that just on a Saturday afternoon when you're doing stuff around your house, and
And you
you
can go
can
get other
you
batteries.
can go get other batteries, and another thing to discover it when the power went out an hour ago and some kind of rain is like beating on your windows and you're trying to
Your
figure
tree
out,
fell.
yeah, and there's a tree across your driveway and you're going, oh my goodness, how are we going to get out of here, how are we going to let somebody know what's going on, and you discover the leaky batteries then, and
Right.
that's absolutely what you don't want. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. And I think in those situations, people think, oh, I have a cell phone. Not my experience. Not
yeah,
always. Every now and then, maybe you do. Maybe you only have text, but you don't have regular cell service. Whenever it's a big thing too, it's like they're jammed. Everybody's trying to call,
Yeah.
so there's no signal. It's like that all circuits are busy kind of a thing that you used to
Yeah.
get, but and that can be really scary. I know we had an earthquake here 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, that took the power out for like 3 days for our house. And fortunately, we have a generator, but text messages
Mhm.
weren't even going through to most places. You could do it like a send as text messages, and certain areas would get it and certain areas couldn't. And the people that were more prepared definitely were not as stressed about
Yeah.
any of it. And so I just feel like every time that we have that opportunity to de-stress ourselves, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
important. I did have too a team member who recently got her ham license, where she was saying like, she went to key up and talk, and she was like, yeah, it just didn't, nothing happened. And it was like some setting that
Hmm.
wasn't set correctly on her radio. And then once she got help, fortunately, she's part of a group
Mhm.
for our local ham group, and so she was able to get some help with the radio and get it figured out. And so test even talking with somebody in that regard of like, how
Yeah.
do I actually communicate? Because you think you know, and like you think you are, but if you're not actually getting a response and actually being able to be like, oh yeah, I hear you, do you hear me, kind of a thing, like you would on any other kind of platform or any other kind of device, then that that can put you in a vulnerable spot too. So I think it's super important to kind of get that confirmation, go through a process, make sure that it's all working and that like, yes, it is actually working. I know how to make it work. Um, because yeah, even our products, like the weather alert is another one. People don't know how to use it, and so then sometimes they'll have it turned on and like drain their batteries really fast. They'll have it on all
Mm.
the time. You don't really need it, but then a weather event is potentially coming, like maybe there's a tornado warning and they want to have it on for that, and they don't know, or they've set the lock switch, and so certain things aren't going to work certain ways depending on what they've done. And so I think knowing and making sure that you know how your device works for again, the way you're going to use it and where you're going to use it, just you can't be stressed enough how important it is.
All right. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for being here today to talk about preparedness. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for
Great.
having me.
So thanks again to Jessica Crotty, CEO of Sea Crane, for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. We're going to be back in December, but in the meantime, feel free to send comments to on the air at ota@arrl.org. And for information about ARL and how you can become a member, you can visit arl.org. Until next time, I'm Becky Schoenfeld, W1BXY 73.